Okay, and here we are again for another episode of the FLT. Thank you for joining us. Today we are sitting with Janne Taalas, who is the CEO of the CMI, which is the Crisis Management Initiative, also known as the Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation. When we think about Finnish leadership and Finnish culture, we've often wondered on the show about how difficult it can be for Finns to progress and travel abroad. But one area and field where Finns are prominent and even renowned for their skills is in international crisis and conflict management. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today, Janne. How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me. This is exciting to be here.
Great, thanks. As always, we prepared a little bit of an introduction. Anneli, would you do the honors?
Sure, absolutely. Here is, Janne, what I found of you online. Janne Taalas, you are the CEO of CMI, Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, as Mark said. CMI is an independent Finnish organization that works to prevent and solve conflicts. It was founded in 2000 by the Nobel Peace Laureate and former President of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari. It has grown from a small startup into an acknowledged leader in the field of international peace mediation, today employing almost 200 experts, operating with a budget of 16 million euro. Finland is the biggest funder, about 40%. Other major sources of funding are EU, Sweden, Ireland, Germany, UK, Norway, and Netherlands. Most of the funding comes from the ODA contributions, i.e. the development cooperation appropriations. CMI, you and your teams have been mediating and running dialogue processes in Africa, Myanmar, Libya, Yemen, Libya again, Ukraine, Moldova, and Palestine, among many others. You come from central Finland, Jyväskylä, where you started your studies in politics and economics. You have a PhD degree from the Oxford University in political sciences. You are married with 2 kids. You have worked 25 years in the Finnish Foreign Service and describe yourself as a multi-man, meaning that you have worked mainly as a diplomat in multilateral contexts, such as UN, EU, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. You have experience in leading international negotiation processes, and you are the only Finn ever to have chaired United Nations Budgetary and Administrative Committee, and you led also the preparations for Afghanistan in 2020 conference as a special envoy. You have had senior positions in the Foreign Service, such as Deputy Permanent Representative to UN in New York, Director of Policy Planning, Finnish Ambassador to Rome, and Ambassador for Cyber Diplomacy. You have described the peace process in the following fashion: to create more sustainable societies of the conflicting countries, that is not one high-level process where at the end men shake hands. It's many parallel processes. Learning to handle it requires craftsmanship. This is how you describe a great negotiator. 1, you are a good and true listener. You are fair and trustworthy. You are stubborn as a mule, as President Ahtisaari described it. You have formed a view, you believe in it, and you steadily drive it through nudge by nudge. Is this a fair description of you, and when was the last time you acted like a mule?
I hope it is a good description of me as a good negotiator. I can't claim to be. I think there's always room to improve, and I really always enjoyed President Ahtisaari's description that stubborn as a mule. The idea is that there is so many, in any process, there is so many distractions and so many people who want to lead you astray or want to disagree with you, that you have to have the big picture. You just keep going and doing what you believe. And I think that is quite fundamental if you are dealing with a very complex process. Me behaving like that, you have to ask my family. But I think there is a sense that when you want to achieve something, you just stay the course. You might have flexibility, but still you have to always stay the course. And I think that is very fundamental.
So not so stubborn, just following the right vision.
Yeah, stubbornness and having a right vision is, of course, it. I think not to be distracted is better. What I've always visualized the mule as just you are dragging something forward, and whoever hits you, whatever happens, you just drag that forward. That's my sense of mule. That's why I like the metaphor that you are the one who really is doing the pushing, and inch by inch you go forward. And that's my kind of sense of really what it means. And there's kind of people are hitting and shouting, and there are bumps on the road, but you just keep going.
That's a nice window into your world. So you mentioned hitting and shouting as being kind of part of the distractions. Is it like common in the work that you do? Do you quite often find yourselves having to ignore emotions?
Yeah, I think that is quite typical in a kind of diplomatic or peace negotiations, that in order to come into conclusion, to find some sort of common ground, you have to bring the kind of emotions down, that you can actually find a common ground. Because in highly emotional situations, it's more difficult to find what you share. You start when it's emotional, you start something that divides you, because that kind of defines the emotion. You think of what's happening in Europe or in Middle East right now. The positions are starting from what sets you apart, not looking for the commonalities that there might be, because and in order to do that, you might have to bring the emotions down.
Yeah, from my own personal experience, which is a totally different world, what tends to happen when things get overly emotional is they become incredibly unpredictable, right? And I think you call them distractions, and I like that description. But it's not necessarily, those distractions can end up creating like a new endpoint, a new goal, or a different part. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it, that an overly emotional group of people will quite easily lose their way.
But that's this. I have negotiated on the Middle East issues, and that, for example, that there are always emotions. People have a history, and in order to be kind of engaged into, if you think of Ukraine, there is an emotional attachment. Finns, it is highly emotional for us, that we think certain things are wrong, and we have to act. Emotions are crucial for the people to act. That's the old Aristotelian sense of rhetorics. But at the same time, it's quite difficult when you start to find really the common ground. You start to kind of negotiate what would be the text that would kind of bring things together, that you would agree something. That typically requires some sort of hard bargains that you actually, in peace negotiations, you would actually give up something future gains, or something that you are going to get the future, and you kind of sacrifice something for the present day for future gains. So I withdraw from this area and I get the peace in the future. And that requires rather hard-nosed bargaining, and that's not typically emotional issue. That kind of that giving up something to get some future gains is just, it is a kind of intellectual exercise more than emotional exercise.
Right. But is it more about emotional suppression, or kind of a way to use emotions skillfully, managing those emotions as a source of energy as well in this negotiation processes?
Yeah, spot on. I think you have, there is I might be divulging trade secrets, but very often in our dialogue processes, there is a first session. We sometimes, maybe this is the trade secret, we call it the vomiting session, because we encourage, this is that we bring everything out.
Yeah.
That you start a process by bringing stuff out, and then you go forward. I think the point is that you have to bring it out, and you have to have the emotional engagement. You have to be willing to take the plunge. And so I think it is using the emotions, but kind of in a controlled way, that they don't control you, but they can help the process. Because otherwise people would not stick to what they have agreed if they don't believe that this is deep down, that this is the right thing to do.
I like the idea that you talk about it as a vomiting session, which is inherently funny because it kind of gives you the expectation that after a vomiting session, we're going to have to clean this up.
Yeah, no,
and
that's
the corporate equivalent is like a brainstorming session, which gives people the impression that after this session, you're all going to have a great idea and you're all going to get to supposed to forward. And I like your approach better because it's in its definition, it defines what do we do.
Yeah, but the brainstorming is supposed to be intellectual, and that's kind of, you put kind of great ideas forward, but typically in the session you would just what kind of how you have been mistreated for hundreds of years and stuff like that. That has to come out.
In a corporation, that's what brainstorming is.
Actually, we did it in communications. We called it vomiting session.
You call it also.
Yeah,
Okay, very good. Yeah, this is...
Before you get going.
Let's get out how we really feel.
Everything just kind of regurgitate everything out, that you kind of stuff comes out, and then you have to shift it through. I think the point is that you shift it through and say, what is that we can actually go forward with? Yeah, no, this is it's good.
All right. So Janne, with your experience as a diplomat, with your kind of academic background as well, you have a PhD from Oxford, and now you're engaged in a very difficult job of peace mediation negotiation. So how would you describe your leadership philosophy?
It's tall order. Kind of philosophy, it sounds like Aristotle and Plato. I think I like the craftsmanship. This is more of really of how you do things, not kind of lofty philosophical thoughts. My sense is that 3 points are really, when you are leading something, 3 points you have to cover, 3 bases. First of all, you have to give direction. You have to kind of get the framework and really the direction of the process of the people you're working with. The second thing, you have to give an example. That if you want people to work hard, you have to work hard. If you want the processes to be inclusive, you have to be inclusive. If you want the people in your organization to be fair, you have to be fair. There is no other way of dealing it. And then the third one, you resolve problems that come, and typically I'll be in my office and say, how can I help you? That, the third part is really resolving the problems that the people that work with you have every day, that they cannot resolve themselves. If you cover these 3 bases, I'm not kind of philosophy, but that would be the way I kind of see the stuff that I do every day.
Mm-hmm. And how did you come to this? I mean, do you recall any events or like turning points when you realized, or that made you realize that these are important things?
As I said, I'm thinking this more. Yeah, I've done a research PhD that related to the leadership in multilateral diplomacy and all that. But this is the craftsmanship. I have learned most of the things I do by looking others working on the same stuff, or kind of others leading and working. That's the way I encourage people to look how their bosses, leaders around them are working and how they are resolving these issues that they have. Also, my observation that from the bad bosses, you may sometimes learn more than the good bosses. So you can always learn.
That's true.
So did you have more good bosses or bad bosses?
I have had more good bosses. And I did an exercise, kind of mental exercise a few years ago, that I kind of thought of my bosses, of significant kind of bosses that I work with. Most of them were ambassadors. And I thought what I have learned from them. A single thing that, kind of sequence of what I've learned from certain people. And actually, I did go around and thank them. When I saw them, I thanked them, and they were a bit embarrassed, being a Finns. Yeah. I said, hey, I learned you this. I observed how you kind of worked with this, and this was something that it has been important for me. So it's really, I emphasize the craftsmanship aspect. That, I like to tease out what you have learned from others. For example, on the being stubborn as a mule, I learned from a colleague of mine. I saw how he behaved 2006 during the Finnish EU presidency. The way he ran very difficult and almost chaotic processes, and that's the way it works.
I love that you went and thanked them. I have this idea, and that I have had good bosses as well, bad ones as well, but mainly good ones. And I have this idea that I throw a party where I invite all of them so that they can learn to know each other. but I haven't done that yet. But I will now, inspired by you.
A party for good bosses.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's we all have to. That's you. Whether you make the guest list or not is really good. Now you have to throw the party, and if you didn't get an invite,
that's the problem. Now you have put it out. So
exactly. No, but I also like it as a really practical exercise, right? You can sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and write down the 4 or 5 significant bosses you had over your career, and then just try to document the instance, the experience, and then the lesson that you take from them. From your second point, I think you said you have to be the person, the leadership type that you want. So if you need to be fair,
example.
lead by example. Yeah, this just speaks a lot to authenticity. Yeah. Authenticity is something I've had a bit of an issue with, because a lot of leaders use sometimes authenticity to rationalize some of their more less desirable traits, right? So leaders that are particularly passionate or aggressive can use authenticity as a defense mechanism to say, well, I'm just this guy. You know, I work hard, I play hard, and this is, you know, you have to lead with me. I always feel like a leader obviously should be authentic, but has to always have a veneer of professionalism, you know, of emotional control and regulation. How do you square the relationship between being authentic and that role and responsibility of leadership?
I think it's a good point. What I have, and one of the things in any organization, that there are expectations how you behave. That you know you can be. That there are certain professional standards that you have to uphold, and kind of there's no excuse of not doing that. That goes for the boss also, and I think the boss has to kind of embody that I behave professionally, and I expect you to do the same. You don't have to love each other and be kind of great friends, but you have to be able to engage in a professional. And I think there are no excuses, because if you start to be authentic and, you know, aggressive or whatnot, you know, that is license for everybody in the organization to do the same. And so it's a great responsibility that whatever you kind of represent, kind of the organization, that you have to be clear that what kind of behavior you expect from others, you have to kind of fulfill those norms yourself first. Right. Otherwise, it's empty, and you lose your credibility. That's my.
So it's more like leading by example rather than authenticity.
Credibility of authenticity.
And really leading by example. That if you want people to work hard, you don't just say them to work hard, but you have to show that you work hard. And if you want to have women around the table or inclusive, you have to show that there are people around your table, that you invite the people. So this is, and then it trickles down. There's no way you can do it any other way.
I assume at the beginning of the process, mediation process, you need to also agree on language terms. You cannot probably have the people calling each other terrorists, but, you know, something else, right?
First names. So that is something that is very, and maybe I'll just kind of trying to think of how far to start, but I think there's a significant difference to business. That's the diplomacy does not share with business, is that business, there is a framework. You know, it's called money. It's called kind of bottom line, that everything in business is measured by bottom line. There is a kind of jointly shared kind of measure of success, and that's something that there's a joint language. You make a deal, you know how to do it. Diplomacy and peace negotiations are different. We don't have that, and that's something that, because you don't have the common. You have UN Charter you can fall back to, but that's highly abstract. So it is really in every diplomatic or peace negotiations, you have to establish the framework, set up what we are here to do. What's the aim of the process? That's why I put it the direction and the kind of framework first, because you have people from different countries, from different tribes and different guerrilla groups coming together. That what they're doing there. You have to, if you have a business deal, there is a kind of, okay, you are looking for a deal that would be mutually beneficial. but it's not that obvious if we're working at the United Nations, negotiating the United Nations, or in any peace process. And I think that's why it's the language, it is really the how you sit, who represents who, and kind of all the nameplates and stuff. That is actually important because that creates the sense of what you are trying to achieve.
And what you represent
Yes,
as well.
yeah. Now, if you are a terrorist or if you are, and there's a host of words and there's a host of but that's clearly something that is a fundamental difference, that you have to create this commonality, that people want to sit around the same table.
Yeah.
They feel that we share something.
I'm 100% with you that there is, in a sense, this like in business, also sports, and probably most of arts is we're all playing a game, and we all know what the rules of the game are, so we all have to basically work within those parameters. That said, though, I still think, particularly if you step back and look at perhaps a global business, the rules in each different locality can often be very different and can also dictate behavior in different ways. And so what tends to happen in bigger companies with broader reach is that you end up into this sort of dispute zone where making the deal is no longer the goal. Actually, the goal is to impose your set of rules and practices on other people. I.e., this is how we do business, and so this is how we think you should do business. So it is true that, like in business in general, you do have that sort of like the customer and the commercial relationship as a default. But we do also have on the business side people that want to adjust the rules of the game to suit them, which is it can be a bit more of a political exercise.
But still, you can't do that if you don't have a bottom line. In a way, you have a measure. You have a kind of yardstick. There is no similar kind of yardstick. If you do that for 5 years, if you're not successful, you will have to look for an exit.
Yeah, that's true.
In the diplomacy, you don't have that kind of yardstick. So it is that makes it kind of that there is a less shared ground. I do agree that the dynamics may be very similar, but clearly that you have to. And the first thing is really why we are here, what we are doing here, what we're trying to achieve here. There is less of that in a business world, because I think it's a clearer what you do. I felt that very strongly during the COVID time, because I had to negotiate virtually. And I was kind of reflecting quite a lot. What's the difference doing with with virtually and with face to face? And I felt that it was okay. It was easier to continue existing processes, diplomatic processes virtually, but starting a new one, establishing this kind of commonality and shared kind of thing that we want to go forward, that was a challenge.
Right.
So that led me to think that there is a little bit of difference. And I think you wouldn't have as big problems in kind of business life to work on that. But yeah, no, it's a kind of empirical observation that I had during the COVID.
One of the key points of this podcast is to really kind of understand the essence of Finnish leadership. And one of the starting point of this discussion was what Mark mentioned, that we know that there are not that many Finnish leaders in business outside Finland. But when it comes to peace negotiation or mediation, it seems that Finns are quite prominent. So what is it that, what's the difference? Why the Finns are actually so successful in this kind of activity?
Yeah, the two questions. Why Finns and what's the difference? And all the difference is more difficult maybe. Why Finns have done well? I think it is something to do with our way of working, and rather pragmatic, as not philosophy, rather pragmatism. Also the fact that we are. I also, Mark's point of kind of emotional, I wouldn't use intelligence in the case of Finns. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use that, but I think the kind of leadership positions, you have certain emotional demands, and then you have sort of practical demands, or you can look that defined by your followers or the people who work for you or the task at hand. And I would think that the Finns typically think of the task at hand. They define their leadership as what they are actually doing and not about the people who are working with them. And that's something that is kind of pragmatic and allows kind of Finns to operate in a very highly emotive environments, because you can a little bit distance yourself from the real the emotions. Also, I think kind of that lack of hierarchies and kind of certain way kind of directness are also quite useful, because especially if you go, the further you go, the more important it is that your message is absolutely clear, because there are all kinds of filters, as Mark said. So you have to be pretty simple and clear what you want, and you cannot change your message depending on who you talk to. And I think Finns are quite dependable and good with that. So would be these qualities and history. I think the Finns, it also helps that you have a history of people who have done it. So it establishes a culture. It establishes kind of Finns as, hey, these guys have done it before. So it's always easier to do it that way. So these are some of the qualities, or some of the reasons what I think the Finns have been pretty good in these kind of difficult situations.
So there's some kind of positive image, a reputation that Finns have in this.
Yeah, it is outside. There is a positive image, and also in Finland there's a culture that it's good. It's a positive. It is something that you should kind of emulate. That always when you have a culture you're used to doing something, you have seen people doing something, it's easier to do it yourself. It's not totally out of the blue. That's kind of but I think there's a host of reasons.
Right. So my understanding as well is that a lot what you're doing is based on kind of on trust building, right? There has to be trust for peace mediation to be a success, right, between different parties involved. But we also know that maybe Finnish people sometimes, how to say that? Well, they might struggle with social relations and kind of building this kind of connections and so on. Do you see that as being pragmatic in this sense? Is it like a impediment to kind of being successful in this type of activity?
There are different ways of doing things, and I think that's something that you kind of define, and that's what I didn't say, but I think that when you define yourself more in terms of the project that you actually, the task at hand, not the people you are leading or not the people you are dealing with, that you are able to understand and handle the emotional demands, but at the same time, it's not that drives you, but it's the task at hand. That's kind of almost a dichotomy that kind of brings to my mind. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that I trust you implicitly; it's that I trust you to get us to the end of this project together.
Yep, it's a crucial point, because think of Ukraine and Russia. It's difficult to kind of create trust. That would be. I don't see kind of significant trust emerging in years, or in Gaza, in Middle East, but you have a trust that this guy will do what he promises to do. And that's that kind of trust that and then you slowly start to work.
So it's not like a personal trust, it's more like trust in the competence of this person.
Kind of it's both. It builds when you are able to handle certain issues. Then there's a trust that, hey, this guy can actually deliver, and it's about the personality also. So it just it's an interplay of these two. But I think they come together. It's very difficult to take them apart.
But we know, I think, in the general sort of stereotype of Finns, they tend to be understated, and they too tend to deliver on the things that they articulate. So whenever they commit to something, it usually gets done. That makes a good, reliable partner, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I like when you say it's sort of a project rather than relations that drive Finns. I think that's a very good description.
Finns go to do something in an organization, not to be something, and that's something. I don't know where it comes from. I've been observing my son is doing a military service, and maybe already there, because you are given tasks. And the kind of basic, that's when you're about 20 men and more women nowadays are getting that. You're kind of used to that. You get tasks and you are expected to kind of take care of them.
Right.
And maybe that's, or could be more deep-rooted in socially. But typically the Finns, sometimes too much. That you kind of, you start to see the human beings purely as a resource and kind of the relationship with those who work for you as a kind of purely instrumental. That's of course, then it usually does not work, at least on my opinion. But you have to find a balance with this. But I would say that the Finns typically emphasize more on the project, that they define themselves as what they have achieved, and they have done this.
After the vomiting session, how do you get the people to look up? Because, I mean, they have been focused on, emotionally and intelligently focused on that conflict and their side of the conflict, and justifying that we are right in this conflict and why we are right. How do you get them to look up from there?
You have to make them understand the other side's views. There is a great story, I can't remember. I heard it from Aceh negotiations, from Indonesians. I think it was an Indonesian participant of the negotiations, what President Ahtisaari did. He asked the shoes of one main negotiator and asked the other side to try these shoes on.
Okay.
In a very concrete sense of, hey, why don't you get into somebody else's shoes?
Yeah.
That's what I didn't hear from himself, but from the negotiators. That he asked me, why don't you try these shoes?
Yeah.
And that this is, there are kind of, my point is that there are many ways to do that. One is something like, trying somebody else's shoes. What I think, and what we discussed earlier, is something about the future. We use quite a lot, because at the present day, the situations are very antagonistic and very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. But if you think, hey, let's think of how this place or this world looks in 10 or 20 years. If you can shift that, and that's kind of some certain foresight, certain future discussions sometimes help, because then you start, what would you expect the world to look like? And then you get the both sides, and then you start to work from there. Mm. So there are different, just to give an example, there are different ways to get the people, but I think the most important is just to them to see other sides' points of view and also a larger picture.
Right.
You're listening to the FLT podcast.
Are you sharing what you did in other processes?
Yeah, and I think that's something what the CMI stands for, why we were established, founded almost 25 years ago, is really to make this more professional. And I think this is exactly that we use the practices and the ways, what I'm describing, we use it in different places and test out, and there are new ideas. And it is something that the experience that has been gained from some other processes will be used in different processes. That's really the crucial point. And that's why we are an organization that kind of has a staying power, that we want to kind of accumulate and get these kind of observations and practices.
What about with the conflicting parties? Do you share an outcome of another conflict?
That is done. We have, for example, we had participants from, I think it was from Moldova. Mm-hmm. We took them to Northern Ireland. So there are island, and just there are places when you can discuss that there are reference points. Because typically the problems or the issues there are similarities. Mm-hmm. We are quite big on Åland, Ahvenanmaan. That is an example that how pretty difficult dispute between Finland and Sweden was resolved. So there are examples, and we kind of bring them on the table. We are not pushing them. We show them to the participants that maybe there are some ideas you can pick from these solutions. Yeah, right. That's very typical way of, and of course that's another way of really getting the discussions, that you get the group somewhere out of that particular context and show there how maybe a similar type of or another type of conflict has been resolved. They might get ideas, and that might get the discussion going.
Right. And at the end of the process, I mean, you have achieved something, perhaps reached the target that you agreed. What then? And probably you won't just drop it there. Or do you?
It's a good question. There has been some discussion of the peacemaking, the after-sales service for peacemaking, and that is a thorny issue. That when you have been involved in something, you have a certain degree of responsibility. Like as I said, we discussed with the Aceh, and we follow with the processes in Kosovo and so forth. But you are not responsible for that. The participants own that, right. And you have to be quite careful. And that is a kind of that you don't kind of wreck what you have been agreed. And I think it's the kind of the most important point is that any deal, the parties have to own it and they do it together.
Right.
Then but still, you do have a little bit of people talk about that and you kind of follow it up, but that's, yeah, it's complicated.
So you sort of rather exit at some point,
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, but then as you said, the practices, some of the expert, the people we might use somewhere else. And then really this is something that's in this peacemaking world. There is a discussion of how to make, you have a Dayton agreement with the ended the war in Bosnia. It is outdated right now. So how to, this is the after sale service that who, how, what, and that's, CMI had nothing, that we were not, but clearly there are certain pressures and of course it's quite difficult to think that any deal kind of lasts for 20,
Forever.
30 years forever. So and what would be the best way to really start to revise this? But we are not there. But this is but that's a real kind of question.
And I mean the Balkans at the minute the tensions are rising, right, across many groups at the minute. So a path to autonomy is something that for most leaders is overlooked quite often, because if you in conflict resolution in business side or sports, you can't be the ultimate arbitrator for conflict forever, because then nobody learns anything. Nobody moves forward.
Well, can I ask, so what do you like most and least about your work?
At least I hate kind of the bureaucracy, having a organization that's HR and all that, having an organization that has a budget this year about 16 million, as we heard, and I have 90 people contracted, and then I have almost 100, quite a lot of people, consultancy basis. That's a lot of kind of administrative stuff. So that's something that is wearing me down. I have to admit that it's a big operation, and also funding issues that I have to make sure that we get the kind of funding and selling projects to our funders. I like most of engaging with the project and processes and interlocutors in different places. You learn so much. You get to meet so interesting people and really exciting, kind of get into a really exciting stuff. So that's something that keeps me going, notwithstanding the kind of the burdens of kind of administration and all that.
So you mentioned earlier actually that Finns are they engage in leadership and trust building in particular, kind of focused on rather than what they want to be, but what they want to do. I'm wondering, as a graduate of Oxford, how you found the experience or the differences in experiences of being at Oxford, studying in Jyväskylä, I believe is your hometown.
Yeah, I think I have said it in a nutshell that in Finland I learned to read, but at Oxford I learned to write. In a way, put it that way, also kind of more of express certain things. The Finnish educational system is very focused on sucking information in. I did 2 master's degrees in 4 years, and I did learn a lot. But the way I expressed, the way I put these ideas and deployed these ideas in discussions or writing or some other way, there was less emphasis on that. So if you go to the UK, the American university would be the same. It's more discussion based, it's more writing, it's more argumentation, and I think that's something that I would put in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a very good articulation, because actually what it highlights, I think, is that one of the reasons why I wanted to think about it is what I understand is when you come out of a place like Oxford is that you have, in a sense, a better ability to bring crowds together, to articulate your points, and to put the thesis and the learning that you have into trying to build something like followership, which may also be, let's say, outside of your usual project or task-based leadership style.
It is something that it really, how you apply, and this is great. That's something that the Finland and the Finnish universities are quite theoretically driven. Of course, you have to do the theory, but you have to apply it, and I think that's what I kind of enjoyed. I've done some other UK universities, and it's empirical, that you apply and you want to make interesting statements about the reality, not just work with the kind of theoretical propositions. So like kind of, yeah, having covered both bases, I think I hope it's kind of relatively balanced way of approaching things.
Well, I think, if you do focus predominantly on the theoretical part, you're basically going to access only one type of audience, right? You're going to limit your message to, a specific set of people. Whereas if you do put in the work about expression and articulation, you should be able to involve everyone.
In the quote I used in the intro, you said that at the end of the process, men shake hands. But I also hear you talking about bringing more women into the negotiation, but also into the peacekeeping afterwards. Anything you could share about that?
Yeah, I think it's ironic because I tried to describe how the world was about 20, 25 years ago. Or when the CMI was established, world has changed, but not enough. I think that is what we know for sure, that the peace processes, the peace is much more lasting if they're inclusive, if you have women, if you have different groups, ethnic groups on board. So that is absolutely clear. We have been champions, CMI has been champion of that for 20 years, more than 20 years. And I would say that we are the world's maybe leading private actor on the kind of women in peacemaking. We have women in peacemaking projects in Sudan, Yemen, Libya, Palestine. I forget some, sorry. We have a host of them that we work with the women. I've been so impressed by the quality of people we work with. And I think that's something that really is untapped resource in peacemaking. So yeah, we have been working on that. We will continue work, and that's one of my promises have been that we will remain, the CMI remains as the world kind of top in the private, because that's something we really want to make.
Can you give an example of what women in peacemaking in one of those countries does in practice?
Yeah, no. For example, now I am from this podcast. I am scootering off to a lunch about Sudan, and we have been in Sudan. I have met some of our women partners, the collaborators in Sudan. There is if you think of Sudanese revolution, women have played a crucial role there. They have always been at the forefront of the push for civilian governance. Right. We have worked with them, and now we are working ways to get these kind of women voices more heard, better tapped into the potential peace processes that are starting. That, this is we're not talking about the ceasefire work, but we're talking about really the fostering and looking at the people and helping women to participate in the process that would, I hope, one day define the Sudanese future. Our work with the women is we provide the women a platform.
Right.
We are not kind of forcing them more, but we help them to kind of be politically active. That they are real. I think that they are kind of catalysts of change. So we are not kind of giving that this is what you have to do, but we're looking for them and helping them. And if there's the training they need, if there's some, and that's how we typically work with the for the kind of the. I'm pretty proud that the first Libyan female foreign minister came through our kind of workshops and our platforms. I can't claim any credit that we did it, because she did it, but we provided. This is how I think we provided. I hope I like to think we provided her some kind of platform to go forward on her career, and I think that's something that I like to see more of really, that women have more political agency. Right. That's how we would describe that. We're trying to help them to get the agency they deserve, and they could play a bigger role in the peace processes.
It's a good example of the helping and supporting.
Yeah, it's and really not forcing to do. They are not kind of doing our bidding, but clearly we because I think they're great people that we have met.
Excellent.
So you talked about Finnish approach being very pragmatic in these peace negotiations. What about the role of humor? I mean, do you actually joke? Do you use sarcasm, irony, humor in your work? Does it help?
It is a very good question, and I think the Finns, and knowing President Ahtisaari, he did, I told about the shoe business. So there is there is a sense of that. I have done it, and I can maybe I tell a story, but it's you have to be really, really careful how it translates. So the kind of the jokes, it is more of really seizing the moment. For example, in the tense negotiations about the UN budget, there was a West African negotiator, very senior. He told me with the old West African metaphor that you have to cook the snake in its own oil. This was well past midnight in a small room, in the small and very serious negotiations. I looked at him and answered with the Finnish metaphor that I said that we have this kind of Finnish way of saying that when you are eating a sausage, don't ask how it is made. And he was looking at me, I was looking at him, the others were, and then there was a burst of laughter. And I get that is kind of was remembered as the great culinary discussion, or that's we both tried to convey a certain message, and it was quite tough, but you can do that, but you have to be really, really careful, and you cannot overdo it, and you have to be quite understated. Finnish sense of laconic humor actually works relatively well than kind of very elaborated kind of points. But that's I think you are, because that establishes a human bond, and that's a reference point when you of the next night, and you just go on you have this. Oh, I remember those discussions because there was this, and any humor has to be appreciated. That you have to appreciate all the participants. Very often humor is used to kind of push somebody down.
All right.
And that's something that you cannot never ever do.
What about the role of kind of socializing, more informally with beverages and so on in your work? Is that part of that, or?
It is part of that to establish kind of, there are different layers of that. I remember in Georgian peace negotiations, we did in Geneva, they started 2008. It was extremely difficult, and the formal negotiations were very difficult. So we planned the session so that there was lots of very long coffee breaks. Because nothing was actually done in the formal meetings. There was more of reading statements, but everything was done kind of in the coffee breaks, and you see the people talking. There was no discussion. What language should we talk? How should we sit? So it is, you have to create kind of context. You have to create a situation when the people can talk to each other. And formal ones are not typically the best. But if is it to drink beer, wine, or coffee, or sit down? I don't smoke, but I've gone to smoking. I wanted to meet a colleague who smoked, and I usually went there when I was leading a process, I wanted to test certain ideas with a representative of a very, very big country. And he used to smoke, and I walked out and talked with him while he was smoking, kind of get the idea what he was thinking. And so you have to do that, but you know how, that's up to you.
All right.
Cool. Awesome. Janne, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. I know you have a lot of important engagements to head to, so we won't try to keep you for too much longer. Your view on leadership was that paint a vision or provide a vision for people, lead by example, and help solving the problems of the people around you. In perhaps a sentence or less, can you summarize those into what you think a good aspiration for Finnish leaders would be?
You have to have a certain degree of balance with this, that you recognize all these three aspects, but you have to be able to tick all the boxes. It's not enough to focus on one, because you have seen that, but somehow the balanced act, different people have a different emphasis, but I think that would be my take. And then try out different things. Finns not always bake and trying, and you fail. Some things don't work out.
Yeah.
And learn, and this is not the philosophy or create kind of, not the textbook stuff. It's more that you, and look at your colleagues, because they're typically similar problems that they are dealing. This is about craftsmanship.
Find the balance, try different things, never ask how the sausage is made.
And try the shoes of the other person.
Oh yeah, shoes, yeah, that's right. Great. Thank you. Thanks again, Janne, for your time. This has been fantastic.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
All right. That was Janne Taalas, the CEO from the Crisis Management Initiative, also known as the Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation. Thank you, Anneli. I thought he was a really interesting guest. What do you guys think, Alexei?
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, he was very kind of engaging and, fun to talk to. I think lots of great stories. And what I found interesting is that we actually discussed, for a change, one field where Finns are really prominent internationally. So in previous podcasts, we talked about some of the challenges that Finnish leaders have once they go outside. Here we have a case where Finns are quite prominently present internationally, have a great reputation, and it was really interesting to get some insights about that. When it comes to leadership approach, I think it's really clear message. So 3 things that Janne was talking about: given direction, lead by example, and then solve the problems of those around you. I think sounds great, very clean and clear message. Also, this I found quite interesting, this idea that whereas in other areas, the kind of reluctance of Finnish people to invest in personal relations, which we actually talk quite often about, is to some extent a barrier or impediment. Here, this more pragmatic approach actually works and allows Finns to be really efficient and effective in peace negotiation and mediation processes.
Right.
So which is quite interesting, I think. And then I think I found a lot of great examples and great stories from this podcast, from Janne. And it's once again, it's great to learn more from the kind of internal kitchen of this often kind of classified type of activity. We don't really hear much how they actually work. And I think in this podcast, we discuss quite nice elements that are not that widely known.
Yeah, and I think your questions about like using sense of humor and all the rest of it really sort of shone a light on the sort of temperament of Finns and how well it fits here. I think I would say the expectancy of networking informally outside of the formal process is probably an area where Finns benefit a lot, because you're, in a sense, it's part of the job to work the rooms, and it makes that network building kind of more formal. I also think that there's a funny sense of how do they succeed? Well, they kind of reverse engineer a good relationship, right? So they put an example of a good relationship and they use examples from the past of when it's worked before, and they get both parties to try to picture themselves in that role and then work backwards from it, which is an interesting way to think about building sustainable relationships, which is like, we know what good looks like, here are the composite parts, here's where we've done it before. It's almost mechanistic in its approach. And then the last thing that I thought about was, he said something that I've heard before a lot about Finns and Finnish leaders, which is that I don't know if we can say they're emotionally intelligent, but they are. I think it's a device that Finns use to kind of pretend that they're not emotionally intelligent, that disarms people. But they are obviously Finns are very good at reading the room. They tend to be able to use and apply humor in the right instances, even though it's a specific type of sense of humor. And in general, the composure that Finns have really equips them well for managing difficult and tense relationships and emotions. But I thought it was a really enlightening session with him.
I liked his comparisons between what CMA does and what a corporation does and does not. And I think they were very, very enlightening, very good learning points. Especially, from a very start on, you're missing the same target. You had to start with setting the target, right? You're not there to create a success for a company or a corporation, but you have to first develop what are we here for.
To do,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a very, very tall order. And then, of course, obviously, I have to take my hat off for providing women the platform to grow their agency in the countries where things are not so well, and also, shine the light on women, and they're able to operate.
I got the feeling that was a big sort of source of frustration for him. Like it seems like obviously of personal pride. So he said putting the platform up to allow women to shine, to take up like a more definitive role in peace building. But then also you can kind of between the lines read that it seems to be a really macho industry, peacemaking, like men shaking hands and stubborn as a bull, and we're here to talk about cooking the snake in its own oil, or not asking how the sausage is made. It all has kind of like serious and macho overtones to it, and I think he's trying to balance that. That he said we've come far, but not far enough. I thought that was a good, really good statement. Okay. Well, I hope there's something for everyone to take away from that discussion. As always, I have to thank Bella behind the mics and the camera. And I have to thank the good people at Aalto Yliopisto for renting some of their microphones and some of their space. And the fabulous people at Fat Lizard who will sponsor us at some point. I can just feel it. And to everybody else, and to you guys especially, thanks again.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mark.